All right, so if you're new around here, I'm attempting live streams on this channel. Rhino, the Daily BA, try to talk about behavior analytics stuff. Tonight, I want to talk about ABC examples, antecedent behavior consequence examples. This is one of the conceptual models that we've actually talked about on this channel multiple times. And this came up because I had a text through the text line service that I've set up asking me this question: was the ban on Trump punishment? I did not put this in the title. This is my first time trying to go through and break these things down. I have a quick preface that I want to put out there, which is you'll see at the end, spoiler alert, that we aren't sure. It's an empirical question, but I think it's a great opportunity to not only teach some of the different basic three different types of principles or contingencies that are often talked about in behavior analysis. But it's also going to lead us to maybe some different ways that we can peek into what's going on in our current culture. So anyhow, this is an empirical investigation. No way, obviously, is the BCBA or other people support this. But yeah, or endorse this. Here we go. So this was the question that I was actually proposed. Was the ban of Trump punishment? We're going to come back around to this. To start, though, what I want to do is just talk about quickly what behavior is. So behavior, from a behavior analytic perspective, is everything an organism does. We fit under that. We are organisms ourselves. It could be anything from a single cell all the way up to complex living organisms. There's predominantly two ways in which we conceptualize behavior, which is through respondent and operant. For respondents, what we're talking about are certain things that are triggered from stimulus response. Think about someone hits your patellar, like your doctor, and you kick your knee. Think about dust hits your eyes and then your eyes water. Think about getting in a car accident, your blood pressure and your heart rate rises due to the stimuli of all the loud noises and things like that. These are respondents. Additionally, we have what we call operant behavior. Now, operant behavior, I've tried to set up here through my tablet. This is my new addition. What's up, Aaron? This is my new addition to the live stream setup. And so what I have here is hopefully the ability to also write on this. Yes, it's working. Okay. It's worked in multiple tests, but it wasn't working earlier. So if we were looking at operant behavior is modeled in a few different ways. For the sake of tonight, what I'm going to be doing is using this, which there's typically the antecedent, the behavior is usually listed here, and then the consequence. I've reiterated this into antecedent, response, postcedent. Postcedent is just what the stimulus that happens afterwards. Antecedent is what happens prior. Both of these are going to be stimuli. This is going to be a response, and the entirety of it all is going to be behavior. I've added here the motivation operation, or MO. This again is another stimulus. So we have both of these stimuli occur, and then this response happens, and then a postcedent, and this whole thing is going to be behavior. Okay, so what is interesting here, and for the sake of our last slide, is we have both respondent behavior and we have operant behavior. This operant behavior is going to be influenced through consequences. Consequences is not a term that means any sort of negative connotations. For us, it simply means the stimulus that follows a response. And this temporal relation, that is how quickly it follows the response, is super important. This is usually we're talking about like immediately, by no means more than usually a minute. This happens very quickly. So that is our quick definition of behavior here and what we're talking about. When it comes to reinforcement, this is defined as an environmental change which follows a response which increases or maintains the future frequency of that behavior. So these consequential things in this postcedent that I have set up here, this area is what we're talking about, and what it's going to be is a stimulus change that alters the future frequency of behavior. So if we hop back over here, this is affecting what happens in the future for this entire behavior here. Okay, so now if we were to look back at this, we have environmental change must be presented. It can also be magnified or removed, attenuated following the response, which increases or maintains the future frequency of that behavior. Yo, what's up? Welcome. See some more people are popping in. By the way, if you have questions for me later, I'm going to try to take some live examples. These are things that I want to get moving into. But for the sake of tonight, I'm going to be breaking down, to start with, positive negative reinforcement, positive negative punishment, an extinction example, and then wrapping it up with this almighty question of whether or not Trump's removal from social media is going to be viewed as punishment. So for the sake of tonight, what I'm going to start with is I have some examples here. Positive reinforcement. Let's just take some stuff related to social media, because I mean, we're on social media, but it's a lot of things that I think about currently. So what we're gonna do is I have an example here for you. Let's say that we have as our antecedent the sight of a phone. All right. Maybe we also have an app on your phone. Okay, you can look at either of those. The point here is this is a stimulus, an energy change that's affected through our receptors, things that we see in this case. The response then is that there's going to be some sort of post that is crafted. All right, the post is crafted, let's say, and sent. So note here, this is behavior, things that are observable, measurable things that we actually do. The posting, or the thing that happens immediately after, let's say that what we have is that you receive some sort of criticism as a reply. So reply, and there's some sort of criticism. Now, this sort of thing, we're going to fill back in over here real quick, the motivation side of it. So the motivation operation is going to be some sort of stimulus too. For this, let's say that there's been a certain time that has passed since the last post. So maybe it's a new day, some sort of stimulus like that. It could also be that there was some sort of, another example here could be that there's like some sort of news that's just broken. So it's some sort of stimulus that makes the consequences more or less valuable and makes the behavior more or less likely. That's our defining features of a motivation operation. All right, so these things all happen. Now the question would be, what is this? Is this going to be reinforcement, or is this going to be something else? The question always lies in what's the future rate of response. So let's say that this response, the post and send, increases in the future, okay? So what I'd have here is have an additional stimulus being added, the reply of criticism. Now I purposely chose this because criticism, we can sometimes think of as bad, right? Things that might be what we colloquially call punishment. However, if this response, this behavioral class starts to increase in the future or maintain in its frequency, that is the posting and sending in the presence of new news when they have their phone app happens more frequently or the same amount, then what we're going to have here is we're going to have a positive reinforcement example, okay? So this would be a perfect example of how we would have a positive reinforcement example. Now, what I could do here is I could rework this. So let's say we have negative reinforcement of some sorts. So maybe I'll switch colors for this. Let's try that out, see how busy this gets since it's my first time trying to figure all of this out. I'm gonna go with blue. I feel like that's gonna be a bit of a different color. OMG, thank you, appreciate it. Just having some fun trying to break some things down, offer some valuable content. Okay, so let's say that we have the same antecedent, so in blue this time. We have the side of the phone, we post and send. Let's say as a result that something is removed here. Let's say that what's removed, let's say that you're a youngster, you post something, and what happens is the removal of the phone happens afterwards as the postcedent by, let's say, a mother. Now, the thing here is this might be some sort of attempted suppression or some sort of attempted punishment, right? Let's say that you are attempting some sort of negative, attempting something like that. But the data is always going to tell you. So let's presume that the behavior happens to increase in the future. So although we removed this, the removal leads to an increase still, then what we're going to have is we're going to have negative reinforcement, okay? The reason being is the removal would signal the negative, and the fact that it happened more likely in the future would signal the reinforcement. If I were to switch back over to here and like equally do that, the reply and criticism would be an additional stimulus that happened after the response, and the criticism still functions as a reinforcer because it increases. So note here, if we switch back to what we're talking about, where are we at here? This is the hotkey. Reinforcement is an environmental change that allows which follows a response which increases or maintains the future frequency of that behavior. So in my examples here, what I had happening was in the blue was the negative reinforcement example, and in the red was the positive reinforcement example. Cool. Yeah, looks like the whiteboard's working. That's kind of the goal. I'm making some strides here. Truth teller, appreciate you jumping in. I do recognize repeat folks here. So that could be example when we're talking about behavior and when we're talking about behavior that is shaped through its consequences through reinforcement. Okay. So if I were to break down another example, we could hop. First, this is an important thing. I'm glad that I preloaded this in here so that I would not forget. We're going to hop over to yellow for this. So function altering effects are like what behavior analysis is all about. And I think these don't get enough hype early on in people's careers, or like we just don't put enough emphasis in them when we're talking about things and disseminating stuff. So for this, what I have here is function altering. I pulled this from a quick definition that was provided to me in one of my flashcards going through graduate school. It's the concept that conditioning and rules alters the effects of stimuli. So here's the important thing. If this is reinforcement, as I have on my examples here, then what's going to happen is the site of the phone and the app, when you are under the same motivation operation, is going to make this entire behavior chain, or this, I shouldn't say behavior change, this response more likely, all right, under both of these conditions. So what's going on here is these things over here are actually making these things SDs, discriminative stimuli, signal that reinforcement's available when the motivation is in place, all right? So I know it's a lot of stuff drawn all over the place, but hopefully that makes sense. And the function altering effect that happens as a result of the consequences is like part of the beauty of behavior analysis, and why I found it just so unbelievably cool to look at different perspectives of what's going on in the world around us and looking at this through a different psychological perspective. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to work on erasing this real quick. Let's see if I can do this. I don't know if it erases the image. It doesn't, so that's cool. Bam, look at me learning, look at me learning. I know I have a comment on reinforcement, so let's check that out real quick. When I teach reinforcement and punishment, I emphasize that it's not just frequency, but a dimension of behavior. Nice, nice, nice. Cool, cool. So the concept of function altering here is, what was I trying to say here? That the beauty of it all is that it's just this. So let's hop over, boom, boom. It's that what's happening on this side after the response, right, is actually affecting and altering these stimuli in the future, like in the next response situation, like when the conditions arise. That is the thing that was like mind-blowing for me with behavior analysis, is that these things affect these in the future. And that's the function altering effect. That doesn't make sense, please comment, let me know. I'll try to tackle this in a different way. But that is the beauty of this behavioral perspective. Okay, so function altering effect. We've seen that through the reinforcement. Let's jump into punishment now. So for punishment, this is an environmental change which follows a response which decreases, whoops, on the wrong one here. Punishment is an environmental change which follows a response which decreases the future frequency of that behavior, okay? So the environmental change may be presented, that is magnified also, or removed, attenuated, which means decrease, following the response which decreases the future frequency of that behavior. So if we were to hop over here, we have some examples. We could have something like, let's keep this. So site of, I should have kept some of this in here, phone and, or like the app, right? Let's say that you click in, what you do is you post, so compose, whatever it is, tweet, Facebook post, etc., and you post it. And then what you do following here is the receives criticism. I'm horrible at spelling, so bear with me. So what I'm trying to do here is set up the same situation, right, that we saw in the previous example. So let's say, again, here we have a certain amount of time has occurred since your last post, or there's some sort of like news that breaks. It can be something like that, right? Some stimulus that starts to, that occurs with, the news, for example, is a stimulus that occurs in conjunction with the access to the phone, the availability of it, which then leads to the response, leads to the postcedent or the consequences. So with this one, let's say that what is likely to happen because of composing this tweet is that the behavior is less likely to happen. Now, this receiving criticism would have been added, which would make this a positive punishment example, potentially, because this was added and it caused the decrease. We would call it this positive punishment. Now, what we could do, if I hopped over to my other color here, is we could have a negative example here. So let's say that what happens again is the removal from parents. So let's say it's a youngster that is posting this, and what happens is that is removed. This, if removed, and it leads to the same decrease in the future response, all right, then what we're going to leave with here is we're going to have negative punishment, all right? That would be the example here. So the beauty of behavior analysis, like I said, is these function altering consequences. And it's that you can look at stimuli and what they function as, the effects that they have on your behavior and the effects that your behavior has on the environment. This function altering effect is super, super important. Okay, so if you're new, just hopping in, I proposed this as I had this question that came in from one of my DMs or one of my texts saying, was the ban on Trump punishment? And so what we've been doing is been walking through reinforcement, punishment, giving some examples of those. The last thing I wanted to cover would be looking at extinction. And so extinction, think about the same thing that happens where there's a motivation operation in place. There are stimuli such as the antecedent. The response happens, but what happens is there's no reinforcement. No change happens as a result. I don't know if this is typical, but I've been described and always I've taught it as no change, like what happens procedurally. So extinction, sometimes people say that reinforcement is withheld. I've always talked about it as there's no change, because sometimes when you say reinforcement's withheld, that leads to people like saying things or alluding to more stuff. For me, response follows absolutely no change in the procedure, what's going on. So to break that down real quick, let's jump into what this would look like. So start with erasing real quick. Yeah, I'd love your speculations if y'all have them on things that have been happening. No, it's totally okay if you're jumping the gun. I need to work on figuring out how to erase this stuff faster, huh? It looks like it's a function of speed, which would be a conjunctive schedule. Maybe we can talk about those sometime. Okay, sweet. So for the extinction example, let's say that what happens is you again have the news that breaks, some sort of stimulus, right, or time since your last post. Let's say that the antecedent here is that you have, I have this one is totally different actually. So let's do this. Let's do time since talking last. So imagine a certain time has passed since you last talked to via text your lover, all right? For antecedents, this would be the cytophone and or their text string, like whatever you call those, like the site of their name in your phone, etc. And then the response here is that you actually cave in and you text your ex-lover, all right? Or maybe it's just a lover. It could be whatever it is that you want to put here, okay? For this one, if there is no response back, so there's absolutely no change in your environment, they do not text you back, this would be a perfect example of extinction. I always like to bring this one up. For extinction, there is no reinforcement that's provided. That's supposed to be an R. And it's a modern day example of the term that is talked about of ghosting. So this is always one that I bring up in my different classes that I teach online through my adjunct professorship at Capella, is ghosting. So the extinction example, hey now, cave in, right? Yeah. So when you cave in, the ghosting, like this is always a fun one, I think. But and like super relatable, like we've all been there at some point where we either received these or we have caved in on these, and I would like raise my hand as saying that I've been one of those people. So that would be an example of extinction. So if we were to, again, kind of erase this back, some of the key things here is that there has to be absolutely no reinforcement. And in the future, under similar circumstances, right, under this same stuff that's going on here, if this happens, it's going to lead to this still. But what happens over time is this is going to happen less. And note here that it wasn't due to some sort of addition or removal or increase or decrease or magnification or attenuation of stimuli. This was just because we withheld this reinforcement, okay? So different procedures lead to similar outcomes sometimes, and it's super important to keep those straight. So extinction happens through a different process. It produces a decrease, but it also changes. There's some different things that happen as a result of that as well. So, all right. So if we were to jump in and ask this, was the ban of Trump punishment? I'd be curious what y'all's questions are. I'm going to erase this real quick while you're commenting, writing that in there. And then I'm going to start to propose a few different things. First of all, remember, this is speculative. This is stuff that's fun to talk about and think about. And hopefully this, at the very least, this video is a good, useful example of how to start to break things down via different contingencies: positive, negative punishment, positive, negative reinforcement, and extinction. For the sake of this, I have some things that I wanted to propose. So the first question that I would ask is, what response are you actually speaking of when you say a statement like this? What is the actual response? You have to define the response. We have in here a definition of the behavior, the person engaging in the behavior, but what is the actual response that you're speaking of? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a more molar level view. So in behavior analysis, there's a couple different views. The molar level view is that you're looking at these larger operating contingencies. The molecular are things that I just kind of described, where you're looking at individual responses, okay? Molar, molecular. You can go check it out and read up. But I'm going to start with the molar, then move into molecular and tell you why I think the molar is an interesting perspective on this. So when we're talking about was the ban of Trump punishment, we have some things here. So we have someone saying that the behavior was the statements being made. I'm going that he was on extinction. I'm referring to accessing social media response class. Okay, cool. Sweet. So yeah, depending on what you select here, it might alter where we end up with this. Now, my points, first of all, my molar level view is that there was repeated issues, which suggests something a little bit else that was going on. So there's repeat issues that happen over a long period of time. I want to look at like those repeated issues. If we looked at the molecular first, though, you would have things like this. So we would have, again, like on my erased, I would have something like site of phone or the app. I just need to leave this here, huh? You would have something like compose a tweet /send, like is the response class. Now, here's the question, right? Let's say that I don't know what the motivation is, straight up. The motivation is probably a convoluted group of a number of different variables. It's probably like compounding over time. There's usually, or I would assume, I would assume that there's also probably things that are happening in the very moment that start to like lead to this happening. So this is kind of a question mark. You can assume, try to guess, I don't know, but there's a whole lot of stuff here, right? For the sake of potentially this being extinction, it would depend on whether or not, when the tweet was composed and sent after the ban, right? Was there no change? So if there was no change, that is, you compose the tweet, you try to send, and it just doesn't send, and like nothing happens, then this would possibly be an extinction contingency. Now, if I were to break this down, and again, this is my interpretation. I'm gonna look at the comments in a sec and see if there's anything that you would interpret differently. If, for example, what happens is the site of the phone app, compose tweet, and maybe it sends some sort of feedback. So it says, hey, you're banned, and it like pops up something that says like, you're not allowed to do this. You've indefinitely been suspended or whatever. I've never been suspended. I don't know what that looks like. I tried to do a cursory like search and see if anyone did screenshots of what it looked like, and I couldn't find anything. All the search engine optimization is just like surfacing all the articles about what's going on in the States right now about this. But if you had the sends feedback, this would be something that is added afterwards. I can't get that. Oops. I had my wrong one up. Here we go. I wish I had this up the entire time. So real quick to reiterate, side of the phone app, compose, tweet, send. If there's no change, I would suggest it be an extinction. If it sends some sort of form of feedback here, thank you, Truth Sour. I'm on like a 20-second delay here too, so I apologize. If the sends feedback happens, so like let's say Twitter posts some sort of feedback as a response to trying to engage in this sort of behavior here, then this is where it potentially be some sort of negative thing that happens, right? Negative reinforcement if they try to compose more often, negative punishment if they stop composing in the moment, okay? So there's a couple conditionals here. And part of me bringing this up here is that we would need the data. We would need the data that says what's happening in the moment immediately after the ban and attempts on that platform. And each platform might be one big social media class, but it also might be that there's multiple different things going on for different response classes. The data is going to be key in understanding this. There are possibilities, right? And I think the more interesting discussion here is a discussion around what happens when you start to restrict engagement. So another opportunity to break down here that's a little bit different would be looking at what happens if it's not actually that you're able to engage in this response. Let's say that's what's going on is the complete removal of even the antecedents to be able to engage in any of these responses. If you remove the antecedents, which would be an antecedent manipulation, there is no way that you could engage in the response. And there's a few interesting things about antecedent manipulations. First of all, if learning occurs and operant behavior is influenced through its consequences on this side, and this side isn't actually happening, then what you have is you have no learning happening. If you're stop right here, right? We've got the motivation operant in place. You might have the antecedent, you might not. We're saying that it's not here at this time. So like there's motivation, right? Due to the stimuli that are around that's going on. But there's no way to even look at the antecedent and like engage with that antecedent. Then what we have here is something wildly different. And so if you've removed the ability to engage in a response, then it's not consequential. This is an antecedent manipulation. It works in the short term for decreasing behavior, but it doesn't functionally alter the future response or the behavior pattern, okay? It can create a stabilization in behavior, but only while it is in place. So I'm curious if y'all would agree with me on this sort of interpretation that what's going on here is actually antecedent manipulations, largely, I think, from that Molar perspective. And the reason I'm alluding to this is because these responses can't be engaged in right now. Like you can't engage in these responses from that perspective, assuming that like I understand how these Twitter bans, social media bans work. So there's some convoluted things here. So the, I guess, way I wanted to kind of wrap up this segment would be that there's a pretty cool piece that I've seen Merrill Winston talk about. And Merrill Winston, really cool behavior analyst. I did a podcast with him and my buddy Dimitri and Danielle. I think it was before Danielle officially joined, on The Controversial Exchange. So on the other channel, search The Controversial Exchange. If you want to get to know him a little bit. This isn't where I found that, but that's the context for how I know him and other things we've done. But he has some things that he talks about with antecedent manipulations, which is, this is completely pulled from some slides that he's presented in multiple different places, just to be super clear here, okay? So for antecedent manipulations, they reflect an understanding of the person's likes and dislikes, which is generally a good thing to know about the person, right? We know that we like that someone might like certain things, and we can start to manipulate behavior through there, for better or for worse, right? Now, they can work immediately, they can require very little analysis, and they require no time spent actually teaching skills. And this is a really important thing, I think, is that what would happen if access is provided again to either the same social media platforms or different social media platforms. And I think that would start to give us the data that we actually need to understand, is this a extinction? Is this a punishment? Is this a reinforcement situation? Really hard to tell, all right? So this Molar perspective is looking at the response class of reinforcement coming from this behavior pattern, in which case one topography of it could be tweeting. And I'd lean to this more than it actually being a consequential and like altering some sort of response through punishment or extinction personally. We will have the data that indicates that this is or is not like an accurate analysis when there's access to either an alternative platform or the same platforms, which sounds like the same platforms aren't going to happen. So it really comes down to the data of future behavior. And since we have a ban, I would argue that what we have going on here is most likely we have an antecedent manipulation going on where this has been removed, and we don't actually know if there's extinction or punishment going on. That's my interpretation. I'd definitely be down to think about other interpretations if you all have them. I'm not going to sign off, but I will stick around for a little bit. But if you're watching this afterwards, thanks. Consider supporting. Thanks for watching. That is a form of supporting, and I'll see you in the next one.